How can you possibly beat death? In a franchise like Final Destination, built on ridiculous kills and death coming to take what he's owed, how can you cheat it? How can you outrun it? Well, after diving deep into the lore of this franchise, I figured it out, loyal theorists. But you might not like the answer. Hello internets, welcome to Film Theory, the show that's just dying to talk about some horror. Today we are finally talking about one of my favorite horror franchises, Final Destination. I was actually a bit surprised that we'd never covered this one, and with the release of the newest film, Bloodlines, after a decade, now was the perfect time. So if you don't know, Final Destination is a classic horror film franchise from the mid-aughts. This really leaned into a lot of the gore and body horror that other franchises would pick up and make their whole shtick later on. I'm just saying, Final Destination walked so Saw could run directly into a bear trap. The whole premise goes like this. A group of people are minding their own business, going about their lives as normal, until one of them has some sort of psychic vision, a premonition of a horrible tragedy about to happen. They see themselves and the other people in this group dying, and using that foresight are able to save everyone from an early grave. Well, at least for a little bit. See, death in these movies isn't just a concept. It's a supernatural entity, and if you escape it, well, the Grim Reaper comes for all of us, and death starts picking off the survivors who were supposed to die one by one in increasingly hilarious and unlikely ways unfit for YouTube. Basically, this is just an excuse for the writers to get creative with how they kill these guys with Rube Goldberg machines of brutality, and they get really out there and really scarring. I'll just tell you, Final Destination is single-handedly the reason an entire generation of millennials like myself refuse to drive behind a logging truck. Also, fun fact, but they started advertising the new film on the back of logging trucks, and it's just genius. Anyway, this is a series all about its characters trying to beat death, to outsmart and outrun their own mortality before death can scratch their name off its list. So, naturally, they got my theorist cogs a-turnin', and if we dive into the lore of the Final Destination universe, is there a way to actually beat it? Is there a way to cheat death and keep on living, slipping through the Reaper's bony fingers before it can strangle you? I mean, they give us a few options in the movies themselves, but basically none of the main characters in these movies have a happy ending. Would we have any hope? Well, I went back and watched all of the movies, theorists, and dug deep into this universe to try to find an answer, looking at all the rules that Final Destination lays out, and I've done it. Beyond what the movies directly tell us, I found a way to beat death and live out the rest of your days. But, well, let's just say it might not be the way you want to live. So prepare your over-the-top chain reactions, loyal theorists, as we try to beat Final Destination. So there are a few things we need to know before we can really figure out how to beat death, and that's how exactly this whole thing operates. See, there are a few rules that death seems to follow here, which gives us a good starting point. First of all, each of these films start when someone gets a premonition about an oncoming disaster, usually seeing themselves and multiple other people dying horribly in some terrible accident. The person with that premonition then thwarts that disaster, saving all of their lives. So just for the sake of explanation here, let's say that myself and the other theorist hosts were supposed to die horribly in a giant Freddy Fazbear animatronic related disaster. But I managed to stop it before it happens because I got a vision. That vision? That you would be subscribing to Film Theory, so go on, help a brother out. Anyway, death wants to collect the lives it's owed, and the survivors become collectively known as Death's List. Well, at least by the fandom. Usually, death will try to kill the survivors in the order that they would have died in that initial disaster. So let's say that this Freddy Fazbear accident was supposed to kill Tom, then Ash, then me, then Santi, and then Amy. Death would then come for us in that order. However, if someone or something intervenes and saves one of us, if one of us manages to survive one of Death's crazy chain reactions, it skips us and then goes to the next person in line. Well, at least until it gets to the bottom of the list. Then it wraps back around to the first person again to take them out. You also can't try to break this chain and beat death by taking things into your own hands, if you catch my drift. Death will literally not allow you to die by your own hand until it comes for you. And I gotta say, sometimes it feels like life's got you stuck in one of these Final Destination Rube Goldberg machines, leaving you confused about what to do with your career. Well, truth is, opportunities rarely just appear out of thin air. No, a lot of people who move ahead create those opportunities. They plan and take action, and Strawberry.me, the sponsor of today's theory, can help you do both. Maybe you're just finishing school and looking for your first real job. Or maybe you've been in the game for a while and it just feels like your career is stuck on pause. That's where Strawberry.me comes in. They pair you with a professional career coach. This isn't a consultant, they're not a mentor, and no, this is not therapy, but it is like therapy for your career. You get real one-on-one support that's focused on clarity and action and results. They want to help you figure out what you actually want, make a game plan to actually get there, and then hold you accountable so you don't just think about that success, you build it. And honestly, a lot of the time, moving ahead in work is like a game, and getting career coaching is like finding the best strategy guide out there. It's not guesswork, it's building groundwork, a structured approach to help deliver yourself results. And best of all, Strawberry.me is accessible and flexible. Their virtual career coaching is available from anywhere you want or need, on your schedule. You might not know this, but I actually was a video editor when I started out here at Theorists, but I wanted to eventually move into writing and then producing videos before I worked my way up to be host. That didn't happen out of nowhere. I wanted it and worked hard for it, using the exact sort of planning that Strawberry.me uses in their coaching. They don't just give you generic advice, but instead customize a plan tailored just for you. Listen, no one builds a career alone, and that's okay. And if you're serious about success, stop guessing and start planning. Visit strawberry.me/filmtheory and claim your $50 credit. That's strawberry.me/filmtheory for a $50 credit. Thanks again to strawberry.me for sponsoring this theory, but now let's head back into Final Destination and cheating death. So with all of those rules in mind, how are we going to avoid this terrible fate? Well, your first thought might be, can I death-proof my life? Can I do something to take all of the danger out of everyday objects and keep myself away from death's design? And that's a great thought. In the fandom, this is known as bringing yourself to a stalemate with death, and it makes sense. Being vigilant and trying to death-proof your controlled space is a good start, though you may come to realize just how many things in your everyday life can kill you. Just look around your room and you can probably find a dozen or more potentially deadly scenarios, enough to drive you to a paranoid insanity.
Tetanus, nice one. I overlooked it.
Like, listen, we have literal, actual decades worth of research and studies shining a light on the commonplace dangers of everyday life. For example, one study showed that in the US, there are over 100,000 bathroom-related injuries per year, many of which sadly result in death. This is stuff like people slipping and falling, hitting their head on the counter, that sort of thing. Just think of how many people the Reaper's taken out by making them slip in the tub. And then there are gas stoves. These can be surprisingly dangerous, and not just because they might burst into flames, knock over a chair, and drive a knife into your heart. No, instead, using these stoves can lead to a byproduct called nitrogen dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide could be responsible for up to 19,000 premature deaths in the United States and 40,000 in the European Union and UK. We humans are very fragile little creatures, and the threat of death is lurking everywhere. That being said, if you are desperate and you really want to survive, this one might be worth a shot. We see Alex from Final Destination 1 actually try this. He goes out to a cabin and death-proofs the place, and ultimately, he's safe there. Well, until he realizes that he actually wasn't the next on death's list, so all that prep was for naught. But that doesn't mean this can't work. Later, Alex's partner Clear checks herself into a mental institute complete with padded walls and no real way to be harmed. And surprisingly, this does actually work for Clear. She's kept out of death's reach. And likewise, in the new Final Destination Bloodlines, Iris is able to survive for decades by holding herself up in a similarly death-proofed cabin. So, okay, that works. Theory done, right? Well, maybe not, because this does come with a couple of huge drawbacks. Firstly, you can't make any mistakes. You can't slip up and let your guard down at all, because when you do, death will take advantage of that and kill you. We see this in Bloodlines when Iris leaves the cabin briefly to talk to her granddaughter and is killed by a freak weather vane accident. And secondly, can we actually call this living? You can't do anything. You can't go out, can't have fun, can't bring anything that could be even remotely dangerous close to your person. In Clear's case, she's literally trapped in a padded cell. That doesn't sound like a life worth leading, and I don't know if we can call this stalemate a way to defeat death. But maybe the trick isn't to look out for every threat, but instead to look out for the signs. One of the stranger developments in this series is that death apparently believes in fair play. Yeah, it'll often signal what deadly moves it's going to make in advance, thus giving its victims a fighting chance. This actually happens a lot in the series. In the first movie, the main protagonist Alex sees a reflection of a bus before a classmate gets hit hit by one, and the reflection of a train before another gets killed by it. Death literally spells out where this guy will get hit and killed, while another sees a shadow that looks like what will end up killing another victim in this movie.
I think I see a man with hooks. Is that a sign?
And Final Destination 3 takes this a step further, where death may base your demise off your final photographs. So if you spot some signs and your gut says they're dangerous, that may increase your chances of dodging death. Well, at least for a little bit. Though, just as a quick aside, all of this might be Death just acting like a big troll. Like, I mean, think about this. Is Death bound by some, like, cosmic rules where it has to warn and give its victims a chance to change their fate? That doesn't really seem to make any sense because it just kind of restarts if someone thwarts their death. And the photographs being the templates for their death just seems like really jokey and trolly in a way that I just gotta respect. And one of the characters in this franchise even speculates that all of the clues and warnings was just death setting them up the whole time, leading them to the situations where they die exactly like it wanted.
What if we didn't change anything? What if us being here right now was the plan from the beginning?
Maybe death is just like playing with its food, so to speak. Anyway, okay, what else can we try? Well, Final Destination 2 proposed another way to shake death off your tail. It was suggested that bringing a new life into the world will force death to rewrite its plan, hopefully letting all of the victims off the hook.
Only new life can defeat death.
The survivors in this movie end up trying to pull this off by having one of them briefly drown before being revived in a hospital.
Hey, we did it. Thanks to you, we cheated death.
And this method is again put forward as a solution in Final Destination Bloodlines. They even straight up name drop the character who drowned and was revived here. So why isn't this one the slam dunk? Why shouldn't the survivors be teaming up to off each other and then revive them immediately? Well, for a few reasons. First, we see in Bloodlines that this has a ton of opportunity to go wrong, and when it does, it goes really wrong. The characters still die in incredibly gruesome ways, maybe even more painfully than if they didn't try anything at all. Do you really want to take that risk? Again, they point this out in Bloodlines. When you mess with death and lose, it gets messy. Secondly, even though they do lay this out as a method for survival in the movies, despite what Bloodworth says here in Bloodlines, I'm skeptical that it would actually work at all. See, at the end of Final Destination 2, after the characters have supposedly beaten death and rewritten its plan, it's revealed that there was another character who survived that initial disaster in the film. This character is then dramatically killed in a barbecue grill explosion, despite death having already been beaten. So it doesn't seem like this whole drowning and then resuscitation method worked at all. If the chain has been broken, everyone in the chain from that disaster should be safe now, shouldn't they? Plus, in the Thrill Ride edition of the Final Destination 3 DVD, there's an additional scene in an alternate version of the movie. We see in a newspaper article that the survivors from Final Destination 2 who cheated death were then later killed in a wood chipper accident. So their little stunt to die and then come back to life didn't mean diddly squat to death. Originally, I wondered if they sort of misinterpreted the meaning here. Like, what if new life was a bit more literal? Maybe what these characters should have done was have a baby. Like, I was thinking that definitely has to count as new life that would mess up Death's design and force a reset. This was actually a big plot point in Final Destination 2, where the main characters think that one of the survivors is a pregnant woman. They successfully help her give birth, which they think will reset everything, but then realize that the woman was never actually supposed to die in the first place, so she wasn't part of the chain. But does that mean that giving birth, creating life, would actually defeat death? This was actually an alternate ending for the original film. Clear and Alex have a child and the remaining survivors are able to beat death because of it. And hey, if we had made this theory like 3 years ago, or even 2, maybe even just 1, this could have been the answer. But it still doesn't work. We see some survivors in the latest film, Final Destination Bloodlines, actually survive long enough to start families. But all having kids did was put a target on their backs too. Yep, apparently they were never supposed to exist in the first place, and Death wants to take back those lives to bring balance to the scales before the Reaper eventually comes for the original survivors too. Plus, other canon works show that having a kid doesn't reset the clock at all. Death intended to kill a woman in childbirth in one of the Final Destination books, because of course there are Final Destination books. And just to wrap everything up in a bow here, though that alternate ending for Final Destination 1 with the baby defeating death was something the filmmakers considered, unlike other extra material outside of the main movies like that part of the Final Destination Destination 3 DVD, we see in future films that this ending was entirely non-canon. Like, Clear does not have a baby in Final Destination 2 at all. So we've tried so much already. We've tried looking for the signs. We've tried creating new life. We've tried death-proofing our house, but is that even living? Is there anything else we can come up with to try to beat death here? Well, there is one way to effectively defeat death, established back in Final Destination 5 and again brought up in Bloodlines. One way to really win out here. See, if you're marked for death, but then kill someone before their time, you get the amount of time that they would have lived added onto your lifespan. And this doesn't actually even have to explicitly be murder, which is probably where your mind went first. No, instead, if you cause the accidental death of someone, that also counts. In Final Destination 5, one of the characters mistakenly causes a coworker to be killed in an accident at the factory they work at, and that ends up adding to his own lifespan. The one big drawback to this method, however, well, other than the fact that someone else has to die for it to work, you won't be sure just how much more life someone has, and thus how much more time is going to be tacked onto your lifespan. This is actually a plot point in Final Destination 5. The time inherited from the people killed doesn't actually end up being that much. For example, that coworker who was killed, he had an undiagnosed medical issue that meant that he only had a couple more weeks to live anyway, leading to an abrupt demise of the guy that inherited the short lifespan later on in the movie. But in theory, in Final Destination theory, if you want to stay alive and keep yourself at the bottom of death's list, all a person can really do is keep on killing just to keep on living. And based on the rules set up here, you could become a serial killer and keep getting more and more life by taking others. I mean, potentially you could even end up living forever with that. Kind of weird to think about, but it is what it is. Maybe that'll be a premise of Final Destination 7. At first, I thought that this was a poetic, tragic ending to this theory, right? Like, to beat death, you more or less have to become death, stealing people's lives in a desperate attempt to extend your own. But believe it or not, the extra little twist here that takes this beyond what the movies lay out, even this seems to be part of Death's design. Remember how I joked earlier about the Final Destination books? Well, they're all canon to the universe, and in one of them, Final Destination Looks Could Kill, the main character literally makes a deal with death to extend their own life. And the terms of that deal, they start killing other survivors for death to survive themselves. In a way, yes, they're adding their victims' lifespans to their own, but it's all at the whim of death itself. The moment that character hesitates, that they refuse to take a life for death, death comes for them instead. And really, death is the great equalizer, isn't it? We're all gonna have to face our mortality in the end. Even the characters that end up surviving in this series by exploiting the loopholes we talked about here, well, they end up terminally ill. Death comes for them, but it's just more patient about it. So sure, if you're in the Final Destination universe and want to extend the precious hours you have left, go ahead and go out and murder. Lose all of your humanity and become death yourself, if you think it's worth it. But to death, you're still just a plaything on your way to your final destination. Really takes the whole idea of, if you can't beat them, join them to the next level, huh? But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Up next on Film Theory. If we wanted to make a real settlement to survive in the world of The Last of Us, what exactly would we need? Where would we want to go?